IntelliJ IDEA 2021.2 is packed full of features for Java developers and other developers working with JVM languages like Kotlin. Take a look at this video to see some of the highlights. First, let's take a look at the features for Java. IntelliJ IDEA 2021.2 gives us visibility of all errors across the whole project, not just in a single file that we're looking at right now. If we open up the Problems window, we can see all the errors and warnings in this particular file. We can also open up this window by clicking on the warnings in the top right-hand corner of the editor. We can now enable project-wide analysis. If we do this, we do get a warning that this might consume more resources on our computer. The first time we turn this on, the analysis will take a little longer than normal. Once the analysis is finished, we can click on the Project Errors tab and see a list of all the errors for the project. At the moment, this project doesn't have any errors, so let's do something which causes some problems. If we make a change that impacts more than just this current file, we'll see a list of all the files where the compilation is now failing, given the change that we just made. We can click on one of these errors to be taken to the error in our project. If we want to, we can turn off the project-wide analysis. We might want to do this if the analysis is consuming too many of our resources. Remember that even if you haven't turned on the project-wide analysis, you will see problems that are related to your current class in the editor itself, and you can navigate to the specific problems caused by issues in this file by clicking on the related problems in the editor. Then you can navigate through each of the problems inside the Problems view. IntelliJ IDEA 2021.2 has added the ability to color code public, protected, package private and private members in our class. We can do this by going to Editor, Color Scheme, Java in our preferences, clicking on the Visibility node, and then selecting the color that we want for each of these visibility levels. Let's set package private to blue. Let's set private to have a background color of something pink. You can see that the preview shows you what it will look like in the code after you've made these changes. Let's set protected to purple. And for public, we'll use a different foreground color. We can select different foreground, background, stripe marks, or text effects for our members. Once we press OK to save these changes, the code will be updated to color code each of these different things according to their visibility. For example, we can see our private method and our private field now have this red background. As usual, this latest version of IntelliJ IDEA has new and updated inspections. For example, there's a new inspection to show when we use a particular object as a write-only object and never query it. We can always see new inspections for IntelliJ IDEA by clicking on the filter and selecting Show New Inspections for this version. As well as adding new inspections, the descriptions for existing inspections have been improved to make them more understandable. You should see the descriptions in the right-hand side of each of the inspections. This should give us more information about what the inspection is looking for and perhaps clues on how to fix the problem. The inspection that checks whether we're overwriting a value in a map, set, or an array element has also been updated to be a little bit smarter. You might see this inspection flag some new cases in your code. Sometimes in our code, we'll find the same problem occurs multiple times in the same class file. IntelliJ IDEA 2021.2 allows us to fix all similar compilation errors. When we press Alt and Enter, we can optionally apply this fix to all places where this error happens in this file. In both the community and ultimate versions of IntelliJ IDEA 2021.2, there's now a new JavaFX wizard. This has been updated to streamline the process of creating JavaFX applications and minimize the amount of configuration you have to do after you've created your application. On the second page, we can select which parts of JavaFX we want to include, and when we press OK, IntelliJ IDEA will create our skeleton JavaFX project. this JavaFX project should be ready to go straight away. And for the last part of this section on Java, just a quick reminder that of course IntelliJ IDEA always supports the latest version of Java even if it's not out yet. IntelliJ IDEA 2021.2 supports Java 17 already. You can select Java 17 SDK and select either the production or preview version of the language level. Let's move on to some more general improvements that will impact more than just Java developers. IntelliJ IDEA 2021.2 will give you quick access to any existing Eclipse projects you might have in your home directory. If you haven't opened IntelliJ IDEA before, it will be shown as a link in the bottom of the welcome page. If you already have projects on your welcome screen, you'll see an Eclipse projects section at the bottom of your list of projects. From here you can open any of your Eclipse projects. While we're on the welcome screen, let's look at another nice new feature which makes it easier for us to be able to select the projects we want to work on. If we click on the cog on the right hand side, we can set a project icon for each of our projects. We can choose an SVG file, and IntelliJ IDEA will assign this as the icon for our project. This way, if we select icons for each of our important projects, we'll be able to see at a glance which is the project that we want to use. For those of us who like to fully configure our IDE experience, you'll be pleased to see there are some new settings in the Advanced Settings of our Preferences dialog. For example, we can now set the left margin in distraction-free mode. Take a look at the settings inside Advanced Settings to see if there's anything here which you want to configure. It's also searchable by typing in what you want to find at the top. Now let's take a look at some of the changes to help us manage our copyright profiles for our projects. Copyrights usually have some year attached to them. This can lead to potential problems as we have to remember to update the year as we update the code. IntelliJ IDEA 2021.2 now lets us update our copyright profile to include not only the current year as a hard-coded string, but you can also grab the original year in the current copyright and add it to the current year so you can have more than one year in your copyright notice. Let's see what happens if we apply this copyright profile to this piece of code. If I generate a new copyright, you can see that at the top it now has both years included in the copyright, the original year of the original copyright and the current year right now. Remember that you don't need to make this change manually every time you change a file. You can actually change a setting inside the commit settings to update the copyright of the files that you're committed to VCS. There are some more helpful changes inside the preferences. IntelliJ IDEA can perform certain actions when you save a file. Now these actions have all been grouped together under Tools, Actions on Save. You can turn the actions on by clicking on the tick box on the left, and you can configure the specifics of each action by clicking on the link and selecting the changes that you want. While we're here, we can see another small improvement which makes life a bit easier inside this Preferences dialog. You can see there are now arrows at the top right-hand corner of the Preferences dialog. This allows us to navigate back and forward between the different settings that we've been changing since we've had the dialog open. This makes it a bit quicker to be able to flick through the changes we've made and make sure that everything's in order. IntelliJ IDEA 2021.1, the last version, introduced a quick preview for HTML pages inside the editor itself. IntelliJ IDEA 2021.2 goes a bit further. If we preview our changes inside the browser, any of the browsers, in this case I'm using Chrome, when we make changes inside the editor, as soon as we save that file, we can see those changes immediately inside the browser. This allows us to see straight away the impact of our changes inside a real browser. The Terminal tool window has been improved in IntelliJ IDEA 2021.2. There are some updated settings inside the preferences. If you go to Tools, Terminal, you'll be able to see that now you can change the cursor shape. We can choose block, underline, or vertical, according to whichever one is our preference. There's another new setting as well. We can use the Option key as a meta key. That's this tick box here. This means we can use the Option key on the Mac in combination with other keys to perform some shortcut actions. For example, I can use Option and B to go back a word, I can use Option and F to go to the next word, and I can use Option and D to delete the next word. There are some helpful changes for working with version control systems like Git. It's now possible to sign commits with a GPG key in IntelliJ IDEA. If you go to Version Control Git in the Preferences, then you'll be able to click on Configure GPG key. If there are any problems with your GPG setup, IntelliJ IDEA will warn you about these issues. You need to make sure it's fully set up before you can enable it inside IntelliJ IDEA. When your environment is correctly set up, when you click on Configure GPG key, you'll be able to select the key you want to use from the drop-down. The preferences will show you which key you're using for signing commits. There are several options you can check when you're committing changes to Git. IntelliJ IDEA 2021.1 introduced the ability to configure a profile for analyzing the code before you commit it. This allows you to do quick analysis of problems before you commit the code. You can also choose a profile for performing the automatic cleanup before you commit code. Now in IntelliJ IDEA 2021.2, you can also run the tests before you commit the code to make sure nothing's failing. Once again, you can choose a configuration, for example, all the tests in the project or a subset of fast or smoke tests. Once you've selected the fast commit and performed the commit, IntelliJ IDEA will run these checks before actually committing the files. You'll see the result of the checks, and it won't commit anything if there are any problems. This is a good way to make sure you don't break the build when you're committing changes. Although you can choose to commit anyway, even if there are some failures. We know that by default, changes are stored inside the default change list inside IntelliJ IDEA. You may notice that with new projects, this is now called simply changes. This makes it a bit easier to understand what's going on in the changes that we've made to our project. Existing projects will still keep the name default changes to avoid any confusion. There have been some simplifications to the behavior of change lists, though, in IntelliJ IDEA 2021.2. For example, in the past, there were certain actions we performed which would automatically create a new change list inside our Commit tool window. Now you'll find that many of these actions will automatically put these changes inside the default change list instead of creating a new change list for us. This means we'll no longer have multiple change lists created for us automatically. Although, if you do want this behavior back, we can get it back by going to Preferences, going to Version Control and Change Lists, and ticking Create Change Lists Automatically. One last change to look at in version control systems. This is in Local History. Now there's a search field in the Local History dialog so that you can easily find what you want to find inside your local history changes. Here are some of the changes for build tools and dependency management. IntelliJ IDEA 2021.2 comes with a built-in dependency manager. This is a really convenient way to manage your Maven and Gradle dependencies. We can see in the Dependencies tool window all the packages and dependencies that are needed for this particular project. But we can also search for new ones to add to our project. We can select the version that we want to add. If we click Add, IntelliJ IDEA will automatically add it to Maven or Gradle. This is not just for adding dependencies, it will also show us where we can update our existing dependencies. In fact, it gives us warnings to show us that we can upgrade to the latest version. We can upgrade them individually if we want full control, or we can simply go ahead and upgrade all of our dependencies. IntelliJ IDEA will make the changes we need to the build file. We can also downgrade to an earlier version if we want to. Don't forget that when you make changes to your Maven POM file or your Gradle build file, that you need to reload these changes or IntelliJ IDEA won't download the latest dependencies and won't use them when you're building your project. You can also see in the package search window a description of the libraries if you click on them. This also works for Gradle. In fact, it even works in this case, where the dependency numbers aren't necessarily named inside the dependencies block, they're actually defined outside of this. IntelliJ IDEA will take care of upgrading all of these. This feature should make dependency management much more straightforward, particularly when we want to upgrade to the latest versions. While we're on the topic of Gradle, you'll see that in the latest version of IntelliJ IDEA, the Gradle run configuration options have been updated. These have been streamlined, similarly to the previous changes that were made to the Java run configurations. Gradle now has a much more simplified set of configurations. We can add more complex options by clicking on Modify Options and selecting some of these here. Running and debugging code is more straightforward in IntelliJ IDEA 2021.2. You'll find that it's easier to run and debug tests and application code even when the application is indexing or analyzing. So even though it says indexing or analyzing in the top corner here, you'll still be able to run the tests. You'll also find it easier to look at code as you debug and step through it. The default behavior as you click on each of these method calls is to open the class in a new tab inside the editor. This can sometimes lead to having a lot of tabs open for classes that we only really wanted to take a look at while we're debugging, and we don't need them open all the time. In IntelliJ IDEA 2021.2, you can now go to Editor, General, Editor tabs, and tick Enable Preview tab. So if we debug our code again with this enabled, you'll see that when we click on these method calls here, with a single click, now it opens up the code at this point inside this one tab here. We don't get loads of new tabs inside our editor. Let's look at the new features for the profiler, which is only available inside IntelliJ IDEA Ultimate. Those of us who use Windows as our operating system will be pleased to see that now we are able to profile our applications with the Async Profiler. This was previously only available on the Mac. The Async Profiler gives us a view of what's happening with our application. We can look at the CPU usage, memory usage, and so on. We have another screencast which is a more in-depth look at how to use the profiler inside IntelliJ IDEA if you're interested in what these features are and how they work. IntelliJ IDEA 2021.2 is using Async Profiler 2.0. You'll see this combines the power of the CPU and allocation profilers and works from the same place as they do. You can see a drop-down of CPU samples or memory allocations and look into what your application's doing in more detail. In addition to these changes, IntelliJ IDEA 2021.2 has also added support for a sunburst diagram. If you have an HProf memory snapshot, which either you can take from inside IntelliJ IDEA or from an external profiler, when you load this, you can see the sunburst diagram here. This is another way to visualize what's going on and may help you locate any potential performance problems. Next, let's look at framework support. Again, this is only in IntelliJ IDEA Ultimate. IntelliJ IDEA 2021.2 can automatically migrate your Java EE applications to Jakarta EE. As you'll probably know, the main change between Java EE and Jakarta EE is the package name, and you can get IntelliJ IDEA to help with this migration. we can go to Refactor, Migrate, which will open the Migrate dialog. We want to migrate from Java EE to Jakarta EE, although other migrations are available. We have the option of either migrating an individual module or the whole project. When the migration tool has run, you'll see a preview of the refactoring. You'll see the places in the code that will be changed after the refactoring have been done, and you can navigate directly to them. If you press Do Refactor, it will automatically make the changes to the package name. Now in our case, we didn't bring in the dependency on Jakarta EE to begin with, but we can use the new Dependencies tool window to do this for us. If we search for Jakarta WS, which is clearly what we want to bring in, then when we select Jakarta EE WS RS API and add this to our POM file, when we refresh our Maven dependencies, our project is compiling again. IntelliJ IDEA's tools can make it easier to migrate to Jakarta EE from Java EE. IntelliJ IDEA 2021.2 has some changes for new Spring Boot projects. If we create a new Spring Boot project, you'll see a new option here, Download Pre-Built Shared Indexes for JDK and Maven libraries. If we have this turned on, when we create ourselves a new Spring Boot application, instead of having to index the whole application and all of its dependencies, it can simply go away and download the shared indexes for common libraries and the JDK itself. This should decrease the amount of time it takes to get going with new Spring Boot applications. As well as improvements for support for existing frameworks, there's also support for new frameworks, in this case Ktor. This is a web application framework for creating connected systems, and it's now bundled in IntelliJ IDEA Ultimate. In just a few steps, you can define the settings for your project, select the features you want to add. IntelliJ IDEA will automatically turn on any other dependencies that you need, and when you press Finish, IntelliJ IDEA will create you a new Ktor project. IntelliJ IDEA 2021.2 also now has support for microservices diagrams. From the Endpoints window, we can click on the Services Diagram button. This will generate a diagram of all of our microservices. In this case, I've got 7 different modules. There are 7 different individual services. If I click on the arrow, it shows me how IntelliJ IDEA figured out the relationship between these two services, in this case by calling URI. There's one more change for diagrams inside IntelliJ IDEA. Remember, these are only supported inside IntelliJ IDEA Ultimate. If we have a class diagram like this, and we open up the Structure window, we can navigate through the whole class diagram with the Structure window itself. This can be really helpful for very big or untidy class diagrams, as we'll see in real enterprise systems. Good news for our Chinese, Japanese and Korean users. Starting in IntelliJ IDEA 2021.2, the UI can now be fully localized in those regions. You have to download it as an extra plugin, but you can easily get the UI working in your local region. Lots of you are already using a partially localized version of the IDE, but now it's fully localized and it should be much easier to use. Thanks for watching.